I will never allow Burkina Faso to become a testing ground for foreign experiments. Our land, our food, and our people will not be controlled by outsiders.
I am Ibrahim Traoré. I stand before my people and before the world with a message that must echo through every village, city, and distant shore. Burkina Faso will never again be a testing ground for foreign experiments. Our land, our food, our health, and our future will not be gambled away by outsiders. The days of silent compliance are over. Today, we draw a red line. The air in Ouagadougou was thick with anticipation in August 2024. The Harmattan wind carried whispers of change that would soon shake not only the scientific world, but also the corridors of global power. It was the month when, as president, I made a decision that would reverberate far beyond the Sahel. Burkina Faso would destroy all genetically modified mosquito samples, and we would suspend the multi-million-dollar Target Malaria project, no matter the cost. That decision would ignite a debate about sovereignty, memory, science, and dignity, a debate long overdue. Target Malaria was not a fringe experiment. Heavily funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Open Philanthropy, the project was presented as a technological miracle. The idea seemed seductively simple. Genetically alter the DNA of the Anopheles gambiae mosquito, Africa's deadliest vector for malaria, so that most of its offspring are male, thereby shrinking the population of female mosquitoes and, in theory, slowing the spread of a disease that has killed millions across our continent. For years, we were told this was hope made real. Scientists from London's Imperial College and their partners built high-security labs, trained African researchers, and launched community dialogues in our villages. Yet, beneath the glossy promises, many Burkinabe felt a growing sense of unease. History, after all, is not easily erased. Africa knows the sting of being the world's laboratory. Too often, we have been the first to receive mirrors, technologies, only to discover later that we are also the first to suffer when those miracles turn to poison. Villagers, activists, and even our own scientists raised urgent questions. Who owns this technology? What are the long-term ecological risks? Why are the patents held abroad while the release is tested here on African soil? When the project began, many in my own cabinet were dazzled by the money, the promises, the prospect of scientific partnership. We will be global leaders in health innovation, some declared. We will save lives, and our children will be spared malaria's curse. But outside the government, and even within the halls of science, others saw a different picture. They remembered the introduction of genetically modified GMO maize and cotton, both hailed as game changers. Those projects promised prosperity to African farmers, yet quickly revealed a darker reality. Expensive, patented seeds that could not be saved or replanted, chemical dependence that forced farmers to buy pesticides from the very same corporations that sold the seeds, lost biodiversity as local varieties vanished, and worst of all, the collapse of cotton quality in Burkina Faso, which destroyed livelihoods and damaged our international reputation. The Target Malaria project reignited all those old wounds. It was not merely a question of science, but of trust. Ask any cotton farmer in Burkina Faso about genetically modified crops, and the answer will be bitter. Our cotton once brought pride and prosperity, accounting for 60% of national export earnings. But when the multinational Monsanto, backed by foundations and foreign partners, introduced its GMO varieties, we were told our harvests would multiply, pests would vanish, and the world would beat a path to our door. It was a mirage. The new cotton's fibers proved weak. By 2016, international buyers rejected our cotton, and we lost millions of dollars. Farmers were left with debt, and the nation's hard-earned reputation was in tatters. The wounds still fester. South Africa, the only African country to fully commercialize GMOs, offers a similar cautionary tale. There, indigenous maize was wiped out, replaced with patented crops that delivered neither promised yields nor independence. Farmers now find themselves locked in a cycle of dependency, needing new seeds and chemicals every season, with no path back to the traditions that once fed them. So when genetically modified mosquitoes landed in Burkina Faso, many people said, "We have seen this before, we know how the story ends." The Target Malaria project presented itself as a humanitarian initiative, but its architecture revealed a familiar pattern. African countries would host the riskiest part, the mass release of modified organisms into local ecosystems. Meanwhile, the patents and profits would remain with European and American institutions. What if something went wrong? What if these mosquitoes, designed in foreign labs, mutated or triggered unforeseen ecological cascades? Mosquitoes are not just pests, they are food for birds, bats, fish, frogs, a link in a delicate ecological web. Altering their DNA, critics argued, was a game of roulette with nature itself. Once released, these insects could never be recalled. And if all went well, the intellectual property would still belong elsewhere. Africans would reap the risks, but rarely the rewards. This was not just science. It was a struggle over sovereignty. Who decides what happens on African soil? Who bears the consequences? Who owns the future? For months before the decision, resistance simmered. In town meetings from Bobo Dioulasso to Kaya, villagers demanded answers. Why were foreign scientists so eager to test here? Why not release the mosquitoes in Europe or America first? Why were African communities always the pilot project, and why did they so often pay the highest price for failure? African scientists, some trained abroad, broke ranks with Western partners and spoke out. Science cannot be separated from history, one biologist said at a fiery public meeting. We want to fight malaria, yes, but not by becoming test subjects in experiments we do not fully control. Radio shows, WhatsApp groups and neighborhood gatherings buzzed with debate. In every conversation, there was pride, but also pain. The pain of remembering previous solutions that left African farmers poorer and their children hungrier. So in August 2024, after days of meetings, confidential reports and heated arguments, I announced to my government and to the world, Burkina Faso would destroy all remaining genetically modified mosquito samples. The Target Malaria project would be suspended indefinitely. The message was clear: not on our watch, not on our land, not anymore. Foreign partners responded with disbelief, some with anger. You are rejecting science, they claimed. You are turning your back on innovation. But in the streets and villages of Burkina Faso, the response was overwhelmingly different. The news spread through the capital like wildfire. Crowds gathered in dusty courtyards. Young people painted signs, "We are not guinea pigs." Village elders nodded in approval. Activists and scientists issued a joint statement. Our land is not for sale. Our bodies are not for experiment. The international media focused on the drama. African nation rejects billion-dollar project. But inside Burkina Faso, the story ran deeper. This was about more than mosquitoes. It was about agency, the right to decide, to say no to powers who for too long had treated Africa as a proving ground for their theories. The government's decision reflected a new spirit rising across the continent. Africans want to fight disease and hunger, but they want to do so on their own terms, with their own science, under their own control. Malaria remains a deadly threat, yes, but solutions that arrive with patents, hidden risks, and foreign ownership are no longer welcome. That is why, as president, I took this stand. The world must understand, African skepticism toward GMOs, new crops, or experimental health projects is not born from ignorance. It is born from memory. It is wisdom, hard-won in the shadow of centuries of exploitation. Sovereignty is not just about borders and flags, it is about food, seeds, health, even the future of the womb. True independence means deciding what we plant, what we eat, what risks we accept, and who benefits from the discoveries made in our name. Burkina Faso's message to the world was clear. We are no longer silent subjects. We are partners, or we are nothing at all. To understand why Burkina Faso's rejection of the genetically modified mosquito project electrified so many, you have to look deeper than science. You must look into the roots of African skepticism, where every seed of distrust has been fertilized by decades, no, centuries, of loss, broken promises, and imposed dependency. When international partners first brought GMO maize and cotton to Africa, the campaigns were relentless. Billboards promised freedom from hunger, Radio jingles declared, "Science will lift us up." Brochures handed out in market squares showed smiling families with baskets overflowing, but the reality, especially in the rural heartlands, was much grimmer. The GMO seeds were not a gift. They were patented, expensive, and arrived with instructions that would transform the ancient relationship between farmer and soil. No longer could a farmer save seeds from one harvest to the next. Instead, each season brought a new bill, a new obligation to the same foreign companies who sold the chemicals required to make the crops grow. Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, names whispered with a mix of awe and suspicion. Many African farmers soon found themselves caught in a cycle. The new seeds brought some early gains, but as pests adapted and the patterns shifted, the promised yields faltered. Meanwhile, indigenous varieties, bred over generations to withstand local conditions, disappeared from the fields. Dependency deepened. Farmers were told, "This is progress." But to many, it felt like a subtle theft. A theft not just of crops, but of knowledge, tradition, and choice. For Burkina Faso, the collapse of GMO cotton was more than an economic blow. It was a national humiliation. Cotton, once the pride of the land, had been our major export, our white gold. Fields of cotton brought in hard currency, supported schools and roads, and allowed families to dream beyond subsistence. When multinational corporations, with the backing of the Gates Foundation and international donors, introduced their genetically modified cotton, it was with fanfare. No more pests, they said, no more hardship. But by 2016, the dream had soured. The cotton's fibers proved shorter and weaker than the traditional varieties, failing to meet international quality standards. Buyers walked away, prices collapsed, farmers were left with debts, and the country's reputation was tarnished on the world stage. The impact was deeply personal. Entire villages that once depended on cotton watched as their way of life unraveled. Children left school as income dried up. Local leaders, who had urged their communities to trust in foreign science, felt betrayed. The promise of technology, once a beacon of hope, now flickered with distrust. Elsewhere in South Africa, GMO maize and cotton took over the countryside. More than 85% of maize, nearly all cotton, genetically modified. For a few years the fields were green, but soon the hidden costs emerged. The new seeds demanded more water, more chemicals, and more money. Pest resistance, hailed as the crop's greatest asset, faded as bollworms adapted to the new toxins. Perhaps worse, traditional varieties vanished from the landscape. Seeds once passed from mother to daughter, from neighbor to neighbor, disappeared as foreign corporations enforced their patents. Farmers who dared replant GMO seeds faced lawsuits. Biodiversity, the legacy of 1,000 harvests, withered. In the words of one South African farmer, "We traded our freedom for a promise, and when the promise broke, so did our hope." Across the continent, Africans learned to recognize the pattern. Foreign solutions, dressed as miracles, brought short-term relief but long-term dependency. Farmers had to buy seeds and chemicals each year, often at prices many times higher than traditional crops. Local agricultural knowledge was devalued as foreign experts delivered workshops and dictated best practices. The pain was not only economic, there was also a psychological toll. Communities felt they had lost control of their destiny. Young people, once eager to farm, saw the future as a trap set by corporations who spoke of progress but delivered new chains. These scars are not invisible. They are etched into conversations at market stalls, church gatherings, and radio call-in shows. When the genetically modified mosquito project was announced, it triggered a wave of memory. Will we be left with the risks again? People asked. If something goes wrong, who will bear the cost? One of the sharpest points of controversy around foreign science in Africa is the issue of ownership. Who truly controls the innovation, and who profits from it? With GMOs, patents are tightly held by global agribusiness giants, Monsanto, Bayer, Corteva, and others. African farmers are not just consumers of technology, they become permanent customers, legally required to buy seeds and chemicals every year. Saving seeds, a tradition as old as farming itself, becomes a crime. The rhythm of the seasons is replay, seed by the rhythm of payments. In the case of the Target malaria project, the imbalance was even more acute. The genetic engineering was done in European labs. The intellectual property, the DNA sequences, the breakthroughs, all owned abroad. Burkina Faso and its scientists were given the lesser role: rear the mosquitoes, release them into local ecosystems, and monitor the results. In other words, take the risks, but never own the rewards. This pattern repeats in other areas too. Whether it's vaccines, fertilizers, or digital platforms, Africans are too often asked to adopt solutions they neither invented nor control. The feeling of being used as a test case is not paranoia, it is lived experience. Bill Gates, once known mainly for his role at Microsoft, is now a towering figure in African development. His foundation has invested billions in projects across the continent: crops, vaccines, disease eradication, and more. The rhetoric is humanitarian, the goals ambitious: end hunger, defeat malaria, revolutionize agriculture. But to many Africans, the Gates Foundation represents not just charity, but power. Its funding shapes national policy, directs research, and often determines which technologies are adopted. Governments eager for investment are sometimes pressured to accept projects, even when local scientists or communities raise objections. When projects fail, as with GMO cotton in Burkina Faso, the foundation absorbs the financial loss, but local farmers, families, and the national economy bear the scars. The question for many is simple: are we partners or pawns? Some critics call this era food colonialism, a system in which control over seeds, agricultural methods, and even diets shifts from local hands to foreign corporations and donors. In the past, colonial powers seized land, labor, and minerals. Today they seek to control the means of production and the very building blocks of life. When Burkina Faso destroyed the genetically modified mosquito samples, it was about more than health. It was a stand against this new form of colonization. Our bodies, our land, our seeds, these are not for sale, read a sign at a protest in Koudougou. The struggle is not only legal or scientific, it is deeply emotional. A fight for dignity and for the right to decide, at the most intimate levels, what risks a society will accept. Even if the science behind GMOs and genetically modified mosquitoes is sound, critics warn about unintended consequences. Ecosystems are not simple machines. They are delicate webs, shaped over millennia by the interplay of species, climate, and geography. In the case of mosquitoes, altering reproductive patterns could ripple through food chains. Birds, bats, frogs, and fish all depend on mosquitoes as a food source. What happens when their numbers collapse? And what if, as has happened with genetically modified crops, nature adapts in ways scientists did not predict? New pests could emerge. Other diseases could spread. Worst of all, there is no undo button. Once released, modified genes cannot be recalled. Future generations will inherit the risks without ever having had a say. In Africa, science cannot be separated from memory, nor can it be neutral when power imbalances persist. Generations of Africans recall colonial medical experiments, forced sterilizations, and other abuses carried out in the name of progress. Under apartheid in South Africa, black women were pressured into using contraceptives not as a choice, but as policy. In Kenya, controversies erupted over vaccines said to be laced with sterilization agents. Even when such rumors are false, the scars remain. Each new project that touches on food, health, or reproduction is measured against this history. When fact-checkers dismiss fears as misinformation, they miss the point. For many, these are not just rumors, they are echoes of lived experience. In the end, Burkina Faso's stand against genetically modified mosquitoes became a symbol, a declaration that Africans will no longer surrender agency over their bodies, land, or future. The rejection was not a rejection of science, but of science without consent, without ownership, and without respect for memory. True sovereignty means more than a flag or an anthem. It means the right to say yes or no, to choose one's own risks and paths, and to refuse experiments that serve outsiders more than they serve the people. The world may have seen the decision as defiant, even reckless, but inside Burkina Faso, it felt like freedom, a long-awaited chance to break a cycle and claim the future as our own.